I have said that the problem, the crisis we face, is at least national in scope. In fact, it is inseparable from an international emergency which involves the poor, the dispossessed, and the exploited of the whole world. Can a nonviolent direct action movement find application on the international level to confront economic and political problems? I believe it can. It is clear to me that the next stage of the movement is to become international. National movements within the developed countries, forces that focus on London or Paris or Washington or Ottawa, must help to make it politically feasible for their governments to undertake the kind of massive aid that the developing countries need if they are to break the chains of poverty. As Barbara Ward pointed out when she was giving these Massey lectures a few years ago, 3% of the gross national product of the industrialized nations should be flowing through international agencies into aid for the poor countries of the world. It will be tragic indeed for our nations to come before the judgment of God and try to defend the miserly 0.1% of our gross national product, which now goes into feeding the hungry, clothing the naked, and caring for those imprisoned by fear and illiteracy. We in the West must bear in mind that the poor countries are poor primarily because we'd exploited them through political or economic colonialism. Americans in particular must help their nation repent of her modern economic imperialism. But movements in our countries alone will not be enough. In Latin America, for example, national reform movements have almost despaired of nonviolent methods. Many young men, even many priests, have joined guerrilla movements in the hills. So many of Latin America's problems have roots in the United States of America that we need to form a solid, united movement, nonviolently conceived and carried through, so that pressure could be brought to bear on capital and government power structures concerned from both sides of the problem at once. I think that may be the only hope for the nonviolent solution in Latin America today, and one of the most powerful expressions of nonviolence may come out of that international coalition of socially aware forces operating outside governmental frameworks. Even entrenched problems like the South African government and its racial policies could be tackled on this level. If just two countries, Britain and the United States, could be persuaded to end all economic interaction with the South African regime, they could bring that government to its knees in a relatively short time. Theoretically, the British or the American government could make that kind of decision. Almost every corporation in both countries has economic ties with its government which it could not afford to do without. In practice, such a decision would represent such a major reordering of priorities that we should not expect that any movement could bring it about in 1 year or two. Indeed, although it is obvious that nonviolent movements for social change must internationalize because of the interlocking nature of the problems they all face, and because otherwise those problems will breed war, we have hardly begun to build the skills and the strategy or even the commitment to planetize our movement for social justice. In the world facing the revolt of ragged and hungry masses of God's children, in the world torn between the tensions of East and West, white and colored, individualists and collectivists, in the world whose cultural and spiritual power lags so far behind her technological capabilities that we live each day on the verge of nuclear co-annihilation. In this world, nonviolence is no longer an option for intellectual analysis. It is an imperative for action.
Dr. Martin Luther King, the CBC's Massey lecturer for 1967, with his fourth talk, Nonviolence and Social Change. It was produced by J. Somerville and Del Mackenzie. The fifth and final Massey lecture will not be heard next Monday, but next Sunday, that's Christmas Eve, December the 24th, at 10:30 p.m. on this network. It will be not a lecture, but a sermon, preached in Dr. King's own church, Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta, Georgia, as a Christmas sermon to his own congregation on nonviolence, conscience, and peace. That's Sunday, December the 24th at 10:30 p.m. The 1967 Massey lectures will be available in book form early in 1968. To reserve your copy, write to CBC Publications, Post Office Box 500, Terminal A, Toronto. And that's the best of ideas for tonight. Ken Haslam speaking. Good night.